This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. This seems to have been happening quite a bit on this podcast in the last year. Having guests on that I was unaware of their cool new books, or perhaps not even a new book, just a great piece of insight they've put together in the past. But I'm finding more and more really bright people that are essentially using trend following methods for the non-trend following world, for the non-market world, the non-trading world. But they've got that trend following mentality in play. It's part of their fiber. My guest today is just like that, Manish Tangri. His book, The 3-Box Solution Playbook, Tools and Tactics for Creating Your Company Strategy. Manish and his co-author have got a really straightforward way of looking at this. For all of us business owners, all of us entrepreneurs, there's the thing that brought us to the game. Execute the present core business at peak efficiency. We got to do that no matter what. Number 2, avoid the inhibiting traps of past success. I mean, you can't just get stuck in the past or you'll rot. But number 3 is where it really gets trend following for me. Build a future day by day through breakthrough innovations. And if you're gonna have breakthrough innovations inside a company, inside your life, it's really difficult to do that thinking that you can predict that. That's really tough. And that's where, in box number 3, from my perspective, I see that trend following mentality. Without any further delay, let's jump right into my conversation and talk a little 3-box solution with Manish Tangri. Take me back in time. I'm looking at this bio and it's like corporate deal maker at Intel. I mean, I'm like, what in the world? I need more meat on the bones than that. That's not going to suffice. I want to know more. But before you get to even that area, I want you to take me back in time, because I think most of us realize if we look at a bio of somebody and it says what you do at Intel, okay, there was a journey to get there. It did not just happen. So what were you doing at 16, 17, 18 years of age? I want to know.
My story is pretty much, I grew up in India, got my education, was fascinated by electronics when I was in school, came to the States to do my advanced degree.
Hold on. You said you got your education. Now, to get out of the Indian education system, then just to get to the States, I assume you did well there.
I guess you could say that.
Talk to me about that early process, because I'm curious. Look, I've never been to India. I'm currently calling you from Vietnam, so I'm somewhat closer to India than you are at the moment. Speak to the process, because I've never really asked anybody on this podcast this question. I've had plenty of Indian guests on, but speak to the process of education in India and what happens when you're a young person, the pressure, the desire, the ambition. What is going on?
Education in India is pretty competitive. There's no question in terms of the size of the population and the opportunities that you have in terms of the good colleges and things like that. So it is competitive. That said, I grew up in Bombay, which is known as Mumbai now. So there were a lot of good schools and colleges there. My family comes from a family of engineers. I had some exposure about what that is and what those opportunities are. It was, I think, in 12th grade when I was in a lab where I was doing an experiment, soldering a breadboard, as we called it, and these little LED lights going on and off. That really fascinated me and got me interested into electronics, which was a growing field at the time. People thought that software is going to be saturated. So it was this understanding of trends. And when I was choosing between electronics and computer science back in the day, people thought that pure software is going to saturate it. Of course, you probably have heard of quotes. People thought there would be few computers in the world that you could count in your hands and things like that. I got into it. I used to read magazines like Electronics for You, those kind of things. I decided to go into engineering. There, I was the president of the Students Forum for Electronics, which was like an IEEE chapter. So I kind of continued my interest there. I was pretty active in sort of other non-curricular activities as well. So that was sort of my growing up. When I finished engineering and I was thinking of what next, I just had this desire and urge to dig deeper into my thirst for technical satisfaction wasn't quenched, and I really wanted to go deeper into it. So that's why I decided to come to my master's in the United States. Got here, majored in computer science and engineering, and through that got the job in Microsoft at the time.
What year would that have been roughly?
I joined Microsoft in 1999. This was just before the dot-com bust, if you will. As I was joining Microsoft, I had a few options of what I could go do. Of the offers that I had, I picked a startup group to join. So this was a group that was trying to make a tax filing software, which was a competitor for TurboTax, which is the popular tax filing software that Intuit has, and much of America files taxes to that. So that was the product. And I went into that because I wanted to do something new. And this has been a theme for me, which was always focused on innovation and wanting to do something new from scratch. In that vein, I like to try new things. So that's how I started my career back at Microsoft. I was the guy who wrote the code for transmitting the tax return to the IRS. And so I always used to think I was helping people, being their invisible angel, sort of taking the tax return and giving it to the IRS. So that was the way I sort of found meaning in my work at the time.
Now, on the flip side, some of us can be like, gosh, I wish he did not exist because the last thing we wanted was to transmit our data to the IRS.
Yeah, but you had to file taxes one way or the other.
This is true.
So it was actually making it much easier for people to do that. It was a new initiative for Microsoft at the time. We had to overcome an 11-year lead by TurboTax. So I think as part of a team, there was a lot of challenge involved and a lot of learning about new things. And so it was pretty exciting, I have to say. Something unexpected happened there was Microsoft decided to get out of the tax business as it decided to focus on its core. We released one version of product which did reasonably well, but this kind of gets back to the three-box solution, which we'll talk about, where I think Microsoft at the time was evaluating what are the things that we want to be into going forward and what are the things we want to forget. Being in the tax business, which was not sort of the core at the time, was considered something that was not making profits. They decided to shut down the tax saver group that was part of it.
Let me let you open something up because this is an interesting topic for people that have been around long enough to observe Microsoft. Now, this might be an unfair description that I'm going to lay out, but for me as an outsider, I would look at a Microsoft and I would say, okay, wow, they get all the credit in the world. DOS, Windows, Word, Excel, Office, etc. Okay, they've got these cash cows, and here you are dating yourself to working on a project in 1999, and I'm thinking, my gosh, these guys had all the cash. But in many ways, it looks like to the outsider, considering all the innovation that followed, that they were just risk averse. They did not want to focus on the outside stuff. As we're going to get into, it looks like they did not really want to focus on box 3 very much when they had all the cash and all the access and all the brains in the world. To the outsiders, me, it just looks like they said, well, we got a cash cow here. Let's just stay focused on the show, boys.
Strategy for any organization, Michael, is all about leadership in the future. I think companies like Microsoft and Fortune 500 companies, they understand that. It's not that they don't want to drive and try to create the future, but a lot of times what happens is that in a company that is successful, as Microsoft was at the time that I joined, at its peak, if you will, it is a dominant logic that develops into a company. What I mean by that is the kind of customers you serve, the kind of people you recruit, the kind of processes you have, and the kind of capabilities and the kind of problems you want to go solve. And this dominant logic is very, very good. It's extraordinarily important for your core business. That's what really got you to where you are, this number one position in the industry. So that's really, really important. But what happens is that thinking, those processes, those capabilities, those are not the right ones for doing box 3 kind of new business model innovation, if you will. And that's the hardest thing for companies to do. So it's not that they are risk averse, in some ways, you can say that Microsoft had a strategy of leapfrogging. Let somebody else take the risk and we'll invest resources like crazy and then win. And they have successfully, at the time, they had successfully done that. If you compare Lotus versus Microsoft Word or the other things, you could say that there was a strategy in that direction. What I'm trying to get at is there is something that you have to forget. You have to forget that the dominant logic is not necessarily the way you're going to win when you're trying to create new business models. And I think that's where that execution is different. It's not like the day to day execution. And I think clearly back in the day, if I recollect, it was a Windows centric world. I was part of TurboTax, the tax saver group that I was part of was part of the MSN group at the time. So we were trying to do services, and which was cutting edge for the time. So they were trying it. But what I've seen in established companies is even if they can see the disruption coming, even if they can see the trends, it's really hard to execute on those.
In a second, when I finish this setup, I want you to define the 3-box structure here, because we're using these terms and people might not know what it means. But not to just pick on Microsoft, because, okay, there's companies like Facebook, there's companies like Google, and perhaps somebody could argue that a Facebook and Google never should have existed, the dominant position Microsoft had, if they would have had this kind of box 3 thinking. But on the flip side, I can look at something like Google and Facebook and I can say, well, are their biggest innovations really internal, or did they buy YouTube and buy Instagram? So it's an interesting thing where I can pick on Microsoft where it looks like, okay, the innovation stopped and they focused on the cash cows, so to speak. But maybe I think as we're going to unpack here, it happens to a lot of companies.
Yeah, first is you asked about the 3-box framework. The 3-box framework is a way of basically thinking. Like I said, if strategy is about leadership in the future, we know one thing, that the future is going to change. And if the future is going to change for every industry, companies have to respond to that change. Another word for that is innovation. So we believe strategy is innovation. If I were to ask a company to say, of all the projects that you're working on, how many of the projects are going to be making you a leader in the future? One way you can answer that is by putting all of those projects into 3 boxes. Box 1 is manage the present. This is all about improving the efficiency of your current business model. You can call it operational excellence, Six Sigma. This is all about improving the efficiency of your box 1, or as I call it, the performance engine. Box 2 is about selectively forgetting the past. And by this, I gave the example of forgetting things that sort of hold you back from creating the future. These are 2 types of things. One is companies can divest things that are no longer relevant, that will not make them a leader in the future. There could be projects along those lines. And the second could be attitudes, processes, systems, structures, culture, all the things that are going to stand in the way of your future. So box 2 is about selectively forgetting the past. Box 3 is about creating new business models. Now, let me first define what a business model is for your audience here. A business model is really answer to 3 questions. Who is your customer? What value is the customer seeking? And then what's the value chain or the chain of activities through which you're creating that value? So when I talk about box 3 innovation, when I talk about business model innovation, when I talk about creating the future kind of breakthrough innovation, I'm talking about responding to non-linear shifts in the marketplace that essentially you respond by either redefining your set of customers that you're addressing, or by redesigning the value you're offering to them, or re-architecting the value chain dramatically in terms of how you deliver that value. Let's take the last couple of decades. We've seen that emerging market capturing growth in India and China, for example, has been a big trend. Established companies have been trying to go and make those non-consumers in those countries consumers. So I want to give the example of Ford Motor Company, which in the early 90s when India opened up, they wanted to go and make these non-consumers in India consumers of their vehicles. So they took their box 1 business model. This was their Ford Escort, I think, and they essentially tried to send these models over to India and try to see if they can capture the market there. The way they did it was they said, well, we already have this product. Let's just take out some of the unnecessary costs. So one of the things they did was they took out power windows, and instead of having power windows for all four doors, they just left it in the front and they took it out in the back. Now, these cars that they sent to India, they would cost somewhere around $15,000. Now, somebody in India who can afford a $15,000 car is considered to be pretty rich. If you're rich, you hire a chauffeur to drive you around. The chauffeur got the power windows and not the real customer who was sitting in the back. This is just a simple example, but even if they had done this intelligently and shipped the business models intelligently, just adapting box one would still not work for 90% of the population. Now I'm going to give you another example of General Electric. General Electric, this is about their healthcare business. So in their healthcare business, they make a $20,000 ECG machine. Now, if you want to take this ECG machine and try to capture the Indian market, they sell this ECG machine to India, but to the top 10% of Indians. Now, if you want to capture the remaining 90% of the market, let's think about what are the issues that you would run into. So the first issue is affordability, obviously. I mean, the per capita income in India may be around $1,500, whereas in the US it would be $50,000. In rural India, which is where the 90% of the Indians would reside, that GE Healthcare wants to capture and convert these non-consumers to consumers, they earn $2 a day. A single scan on this $20,000 ECG machine costs $200. You can just do the mental math and see you have to wait for 100 days and work for 100 days to get a single scan. It's just not affordable for the rural India. But let's say you did have a village where affordability was not a problem. The other issue is this ECG machine weighs 500 pounds. Unlike US, where there are sophisticated imaging centers where people can go and they have all these big machines, $1 million CAT scan, X-ray machines, and this 20,000 ECG machine, in rural India, there are no sophisticated imaging centers. You have to actually take this door to door. And you can't do that because you can't put this in your backpack, given it weighs 500 pounds. Let's assume you take a bus and put this on a bus and now take it to rural India. Yet another problem. This ECG machine, this $20,000 ECG machine, it runs on house current. In rural India, electricity is either unavailable or unreliable. That is yet another problem. Now, let's say you found a village which was willing to pay for the scan that didn't have the problem of electricity. There is yet another problem, which is this ECG machine, this $20,000 ECG machine, which comes with a 500-page manual and requires trained technicians to actually operate it. Even if you actually took it to the rural India and you were able to take it door to door, you would not be able to have somebody use it. What GE Healthcare did was they created, and this is a box 3 innovation example, they created a $500 ECG machine, which was very simple. It had just two buttons, start and stop. Anybody who could read traffic lights could see the green and red and operate this. A single scan cost 10 cents. So even with that $2 income, you could get a scan. It was battery operated. A single battery charge could do like 750 scans. And it was lighter than a can of Coca-Cola. So you can actually put it in your backpack and take it door to door. This is an example of a box 3 innovation where you converted non-consumers who had the same problem but could not consume your box 1 business model into consumers. You did that by really innovating and figuring out how to deliver this value to them.
From your perspective, though, a box 3 innovation doesn't necessarily have to be a derivative of something going on in box 1.
No, it doesn't have to be.
And this gets back to my setup with Google buying YouTube and Facebook buying Instagram.
In our book, the 3-Box Solution Playbook, we talk about the process of creating the future, basically 3 steps. There's ideation, which is coming up with these box 3 ideas, which redefine your customer set that you want to go, redefine your value proposition and the value chain. So that's the ideation piece. And then there is the incubation piece, which is all about testing assumptions, testing the product market fit. And then there is this third piece, which is scaling. So in your Google YouTube example, I would say that, and I have some examples in my book as well of M&A, that Google really skipped this incubation. They let YouTube do the incubation process where it let YouTube figure out all the issues and test its assumptions. And then they had something that they could take and they brought it in through M&A, and then they were able to use Google's resources to scale it. So I think that's how I would answer that question.
It's an interesting thought because if I look at a big company and I'm looking at the 3-box structure, okay, we know, and we can get into this in a second, we know we want to have this box 3 structure, but the people inside our company that are operating currently in box 1 might not be the people that operate so efficiently or wisely in box 3. And so it really is interesting to look at this and say, well, if you've got a company that has enough cash, instead of trying to have inside Google to develop the next YouTube, why not just keep buying the next YouTube? I mean, there's an interesting yin and a yang here. I don't necessarily know if there's a one right way. It's probably done both ways. But speak to the idea of the people and the spread of people in an organization. In my point, the box 1 and box 3 people might not exactly be the same.
That's a great point, Michael. Definitely, the box 3 requires new competencies. A good example here would be, let's take an automobile company like GM. They are wanting to become, from an automobile company, they want to become mobility company. So they want skill sets that are autonomous driving related. And these are very different in terms of the people. They probably need software skills, computer vision skills, data scientists. The way things get done, they probably require new technologies like radar and new capabilities. If you look at what GM has done, is they bought cruise automation, and that's how they got these new skill sets from the outside. And this, I think, is a recurring theme that I have seen, and I think this is what you're alluding to, is that oftentimes the rate of change in the market is so high that markets are outpacing companies. And because markets are outpacing companies, the evidence of this, if you think about it, is if you go back to the S&P 500 and see what's the average lifespan of a company in S&P 500, let's say in the 1960s or something, it was probably like 60 years or so, 50, 60 years. And if you look at the average lifespan of companies today, it's probably 25 to 35 years. And so it's really decreasing. Companies are not able to move quick enough. One of the reasons is because they are squarely focused on, and sometimes way over focused on, their box 1, which is extraordinarily important. Without box 1, you cannot have box 3. So box 1 is really, really important.
Box 1 gives you the chips to play, to sit at the poker table.
Exactly. If you don't have a box 1, you don't have the privilege to really go after these box 3, especially in times we find ourselves in from a COVID-19 perspective. Yes, the box 3 capability. So in our book, we actually have a tool where we say there are some principles. I remember I mentioned the forgetting challenge. The way you forget your dominant logic in a company is by creating a dedicated team to do box 3 innovation. Who do you hire in this dedicated team is really important. If you look at the New York Times example that we give in the book, this was when New York Times went from the New York Times newspaper to New York Times digital during the late 90s, during the internet era. The successful model was 75% of the team was actually hired from outside. You do have a role for people from the inside. So it's not that you want to have this team totally be isolated. But this hiring this dedicated team from the outside has an added advantage, not just in getting the new skill sets, but also for getting the dominant logic that you've been used these multi-year long, maybe product cycles, which are now turning into daily product cycles, those kind of things that have to be unlearned, if you will. We have a tool in the book where we talk about if you're hiring somebody from the outside, when you consider that from an intensity of forgetting challenge, you can give them full marks. If it's somebody from the inside, we say divide that by 2 in terms of what that person contributes to the forgetting challenge. Definitely, it's a mix of both. You still need some people from box 1 in this dedicated team because box 3 cannot be totally isolated. it has to borrow from box one. When it borrows resources, which we call the shared stuff, then there are conflicts that have to be managed. You need knowledge of working with box one. So this is a place where box one people can be part of the team and really contribute to the box three initiative.
I have a scale question, and perhaps my example will be shot down because it can't be scaled. But some of these numbers that I'm going to outline start to get me curious about a 3-box structure, and specifically box number 3 for large organizations, because it sure looks like opportunity. The example is this. If I think of the youngest Kardashian, she is the youngest self-made billionaire in America. Okay, it's her, a small cosmetics business in terms of people, and she has a powerful brand. And I'm curious how Box 3 Innovation thinks about brand, because brand is becoming more and more powerful. Because look, there's plenty of social media influencers that they're making $1 million or $10 million or whatever, and that's not enough to cause Microsoft to sweat anything. If one young lady can move so much product to where she can make herself $1 billion, that starts to become really interesting. And it makes me curious about how large organizations are going to look at individual social brands in the future, because maybe they're not really at a place where the large groups are thinking they're true competitors. But then again, I can remember back to 1999 and Google was just a freaking page on the internet amongst many search places from Alta Vista to InfoSeek, you name it. So things happen fast, and it's really interesting to see how singular brands are getting major market share these days.
It's really interesting, Mike. I think I would say in businesses where brand is driving the sale, of course, if you have a non-traditional brand like the one you mentioned, that could be a non-traditional competitor that you have to deal with. I'm not sure how I think about that particular example, but let's take your podcasting business, for example. You have a brand.
I wouldn't call it a business, though, because I don't know that there's any money in podcasting except for maybe Joe Rogan.
When I say business, I mean from a conceptual business model perspective. I'm just trying to do this on the fly. Let's take this as an example. If I were to take your customers for this podcasting piece of your business model, then the customers would be people who are interested in investing and trends and new ideas. If you look at the value you're offering them insights as well as engaging conversations. And you do this by really asking insightful questions. And so that's the value you're bringing in. If you look at the value chain architecture, it's basically you preparing for the interview like we are doing right now, spending 30 minutes to an hour interviewing the person. Now, if I were to try to apply this box 3 thinking here, one way I could say this is that if you were to radically change the way you provide this value, and I'll give you an example. Let's say you take your 800 shows and basically run that through an artificial intelligence software that can learn and train and figure out how Michael Covell does this, right? How is he so good? What is his technique of generating these insightful and engaging conversations? And then you basically are able to automate this where you have a virtual agent where you do feed it some prior data based on your understanding. And now you've created an automated platform, which any of your guests can now just essentially use to create podcasts. And that frees up 30 to an hour plus the preparation time for you. And now what you can go do is you can focus on personalizing these podcasts to not just a segment of, let's say, investing interested people, but you can personalize it to one-on-one. You could find that customer that really is looking for a particular insight and then match that insight. And that, I think, you can scale this now to not just 9 million users, but to billions of users, because you can have so many podcasts. And here, I think you're leveraging a technology discontinuity, which is what the internet was in 1995. Artificial intelligence is today, what software was in the past decade. So hopefully that gives an example of, it's probably not the same vein as your brand question, but hopefully it helps you understand the box 3 thinking.
This is a complete side tangent, but you woke my mind up to it. I had a conversation last night with my mother from 8,000 miles away, and I explained to her, I said, I've done this podcast for so long. There's 800 plus episodes. It's not as many as perhaps an AM radio personality who's been on the radio for 30 years, because there's going to be a lot of vocal content. But I explained to my mother, I said, at some stage, somebody's going to be able to look back in time and they're going to take all this vocal content from Michael Covell and they're going to put it into some type of AI machine.
Yeah.
And then they're going to be able to create Michael Covell ongoing, because they're going to know how he talks. They're going to know how he thinks. There's only going to be so many people in the world that have actually spent years and years and years, if not decades, to put that much of their mental whatever into audio format. Then I explained to my mother, I said, now listen, when they get to the point where there's an artificial Michael and you don't know the difference between talking to your son and talking to a robot, I said to her, well, what do we have then? She's like, I don't know. I said, well, how do you know the difference between a real me and a not real me? And she's like, that's a really good question. I said, yeah, it really is, isn't it?
I mean, fortunately, you still have to be around, Michael. You can't just leave it to AI.
But hold on. I can't let you get away with that. Why not? At some point in time in the future, why not?
The thing is, take today's situation with COVID-19. What is happening is, if you look at the top searches on Google, they are for masks, they're for Lysol wipes, they're for different things. The models that have been trained don't have any clue. This has never been seen before. What I'm trying to say is that the artificial intelligence augments Michael. Michael can use artificial intelligence to replicate himself, but it's a long way from saying that artificial intelligence can just work by itself, because there are things that the models, you only trained it on 800 episodes.
You said it's a long way. That doesn't mean it's an impossible way. Not enough data.
Not enough data. And that's what you run into, because there's always these different scenarios that you have not accounted for, which is what is happening today. There are people that have automatic inventory, which is AI-based inventory systems that are breaking down now because COVID-19 is really changing the way the algorithms work. They've never experienced these kind of things before. The forecasting that companies were doing in terms of what their inventory levels should be based on prior data is no longer relevant in this current environment. What I'm trying to say is, yeah, conceptually, I can see where you're going. I like to think that it augments your senses and your ability to do things rather than totally replace them.
But you bring up an interesting point, because I can think, let's take it to a higher level guy than me. Let's look at a guy like Nassim Taleb, Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness. I mean, he's got content out there that's off the hook. And I don't think anything in his world, I mean, maybe the AI would have to clean up some rough edges or something, but his mindset would have probably had people thinking, well, yeah, COVID was completely possible. So I think it depends on really the type of individual and what, because look, there's, as you mentioned, there's people that are like, wow, my God, where did COVID come from? Other people have been saying, well, it's a black swan.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not possible. What I'm saying is that AI engine that you build, it'd be hard for it to work in that COVID situation because it does not have the data that it's trained on. That's all. And I'm no expert on AI, by the way. So I'm sure there's what I'm likening to is generalized AI, which I think is far away from coming. And that's where I wanted to state. Yeah.
Let's keep it at COVID for a moment as we wind down. Were you Silicon Valley right now? Where are you at?
Yep.
For us lay people, not working at Intel, not seeing behind the scenes, and I'm sure you have a lot of friends and associates at other large companies that we all know the names. What's going on? What's going on behind the scenes? What are you and your teams and your associates and your friends? What's the conversation behind the scenes in Silicon Valley?
I think business continuity is number one. That's job one right now. In this environment, a lot of companies are naturally focused on cash preservation and making their balance sheets healthy. And if they aren't already healthy, everybody is sort of hunkering down. I would say, from my 3-box lens, if you can afford the privilege that you have a healthy balance sheet and you can ride this out, then you do want to focus on creating the future. You want to earn your leadership 10 years from now. And it's not about what you do 10 years from now. It's what you do now in terms of allocating some resources to these box 2, box 3 projects. So you want to really take a deep look at, okay, well, what are the box 2 moves I need to make? What are the things that I want to divest and get out of? And then what are the box three moves I need to make? This is something I can say is going on for sure, which is the digital transformation is getting accelerated. So that's something that's going on. Microsoft has just said that they've seen digital transformation that would take 2 years happen in 2 months. So companies are definitely making that a priority. Can we leverage this opportunity to acquire talent cheaply? I think that is another thought that companies should be taking on at this moment. But no question, business continuity is job one.
If we start to just play around in box three and think about the future, because it's just one big guess, but it sure looks like right now that COVID is going to put us all in motion. And maybe this is what you mean by the digital strategy, but it's going to put us all in motion to where, I mean, if I just look at the end user and the way they behave, well, they've gotten a lot more used to food delivery. They've gotten a lot more used to watching Netflix. So the home experience, hopefully people will not hold on to that, but I would think a certain large segment of the population is going to be forever changed by doing so much of what they normally do outside of the home and now doing it in the home.
Yeah, there were certain trends, for example, that were already going to happen, but the COVID-19 has accelerated, like telehealth is one example, I would say. Working from home is another one. These are kind of trends that have accelerated. Companies are saying people are using less shampoo, they are cooking more. Now, will that persist and stay? Well, that's anybody's guess. But one thing is clear that consumer behavior will change. It is advisable to not try to fight the trend, but to embrace it and see. In the book, I call this the weak signal. You have to sort of take these weak signals, which are essentially signals that the future is sending you in the present, but they may be noise. You have to amplify them and test them out and see, well, are they really signals? An example of a weak signal, I can give the example of Hasbro, for example. Let's say Hasbro in 1995 was a toy and game maker in the family entertainment industry. So they had things like their toys were G.I. Joe, Mr. Potato Head, and in terms of the games that they had were Monopoly and Scrabble. If you were part of their leadership team in 1995 and looking at signals, you could see that gaming will go to other platforms. There were weak signals like Atari, for example, at the time had come up with technology-based gaming. It was clumsy, it was expensive, but you could see that and say, oh, what if this did come to bear? What is the impact of this going to happen in my business? And how do I either exploit this or find another way around it? And so I think that kind of thinking has to happen even in these situations. I like this quote, which is that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And some trends come back. People, they may be buying board games now because they have more time with their families, they're working from home, and they want to avoid all the screen time and they want to do this digital detox. The trend that existed back then, where family entertainment meant that you had a husband and wife with two kids having a face to face experience, maybe that comes back. It's going to be fascinating, but there's going to be a lot of change.
That box three, I haven't said this during the podcast, but that box three thinking ultimately is very similar to some of the investment books that I've read in this particular strategy, which is very much akin to a venture capital strategy. And basically it says, look, we don't know what's going to hit. We don't know what's going to be the next home run, but we have to take enough bites at enough different apples, knowing full well that a lot of those bites are not going to pan out. We're going to have to take losses, small losses, hopefully, but we're playing the game to be like Babe Ruth, a lot of strikeouts, and then we're going to get some home runs. That's the name of the game. I still think that's a very difficult strategy for a lot of people to accept. People want consistency. They don't want to have loss.
Michael, I agree with some of what you said, but also there is a nuance in established companies. Sometimes leaders fall into this VC mentality and say, well, I don't know which one's going to succeed, so let me sprinkle some seeds and see which one will fruit. If you were to look at it that way, one could argue that the owners of the company, the shareholders, they can diversify better than management. And so if you're just doing that, if you're just distributing, making some bets and trying to get outsized returns using like a VC mindset, then why do that? You could essentially let your shareholders do that. What I see is that leaders have to make fewer bets. They have to take multiple bites and all that. But I think there has to be a differentiated insight that's based on your strategic intent of the company and core competencies of the company. And these are two concepts I describe in the book. It's only when you do that you have as a leader the confidence to make a bet that would then, if you follow the box 3 process that's outlined in the book, that you can improve your odds of returning.
I did not necessarily just mean pure shotgun from the tech perspective, but I still think that we're still going to have a situation that when we get to box 3, I mean, we can't predict what's going to happen. We don't know. We're going to go in there with all of our experience in box 1. We're going to go in there with our box 2 attitudes. We're going to get to box 3, but we can't guarantee anything.
Absolutely. We can't guarantee anything. All I'm saying is that, one, you can't have too many box 3s. The reason is, as box 3s scale, there is an inherent conflict between box 1 and box 3 in terms of resources, in terms of investments, in terms of time horizons, in terms of management attention, and so forth. There's only so many box 3s you can scale with a box 1 by your side. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
No, it's a fair point. You got me thinking right off the bat, because it's like, it's a challenging landscape to think through. I can lay out the scenario that I laid out, and then you can counter and say, well, hold on, you didn't think about this. And that's the thrust of where you guys go in your book. And that is the 3-box solution playbook, tools and tactics for creating your company's strategy. A lot more detail than we've gone today. I kind of took you around all kinds of topics today, tried to get you to open up some about the experience in India. I think you were more interested in avoiding that as much as you could, but I got some out of you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate it. Once again, it was an honor to be part of the show, and I'm excited for your audience to read this book and get some insights.
Hey, where can we send people besides they can go to Amazon and all that fun stuff? Was there a website you'd like to send people to?
If you want to reach me, you can reach me at operationalizinginnovation@gmail.com. This is my email address. You can also just look up 3-box solution. There is a website for the book, which I think is part of VG and Dartmouth's, hosted by VG and Dartmouth. So those are the 2 resources I would point you to.
Appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for dealing with my questions that come from all different angles that you're not expecting, I hope. Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.